Chile is the kind of country that looks small on the map, but when you start digging deeper, you realize that it hides things that even encyclopedias can't cover. It's long, narrow, full of extremes, and to top it all off, it holds some of the craziest records on the planet. There are places where it hasn't rained in thousands of years, a volcano that rivals Everest in height, an earthquake that shook half the world, and even coffee served in a way that, honestly, couldn't be better invented. And here's a spoiler. There's a coffee shop downtown where the waitresses serve practically naked. And best of all, the more we dig, the more cool weirdness we find. So get ready, because today we're going to cross Chile from coast to coast and discover the craziest curiosities, behind-the-scenes stories, and details that few people know about. Today on Bello Mundo, we're taking you there, because Chile deserves to be told in a way that only we here on this channel know how to do. Number 1. Location and geographical data. Chile is one of those cases where the map is deceiving. Looking from afar, you might think that the country is just a little strip stuck to the left side of South America. And it is, but that's precisely the joke. This thin strip of land is over 4,000 kilometers long, almost the distance from New York to London. However, at its widest point, it is barely 200 kilometers wide. It's like a strip of land stretched to its limit, squeezed between the immensity of the Pacific Ocean on one side and the wall of the Andes Mountains on the other. And because it is so narrow, Chile has managed to accumulate practically every climate possible. In the far north is the Atacama Desert, the driest place on the planet. In the central part of the country, the scenery changes completely. There are fertile valleys, plantations, wineries, and vibrant cities with a much milder and well-defined climate. In the south, Chile becomes practically a nature documentary. Crystal-clear lakes, glaciers, snow-capped mountains, and Patagonia with its otherworldly landscape. And in the extreme south is Puerto Williams, which Chile officially turned into a city just to steal the title that for many years belonged to Ushuaia in Argentina, known as the city at the end of the world. Now, Puerto Williams carries that title with its small population, scientific bases, and the feeling that from there on, Antarctica begins. You can see that Chile isn't just that narrow strip stuck to the map, right? It's practically a natural laboratory where desert, forest, volcanoes, glaciers, and ocean all come together and mix. Number 2. History. Before becoming the country full of contrasts that we see today, these lands already had a lot of history. Indigenous peoples such as the Mapuche, the Atacameños, the Diaguitas, and many others dominated the region long before any European even dreamed of setting foot in those parts. Each left their mark, their traditions, and a culture that, in one way or another, still lives on today. It was only in the 16th century that the Spanish landed there. Led by Pedro de Valdivia, they arrived in the famous wave of colonization at a time when Spain was practically collecting pieces of the world. But conquering this territory was not exactly a walk in the park. The Mapuche, for example, clashed with the invaders for decades in a resistance that became legendary, and for many people is still a source of national pride. For more than 200 years, it remained under Spanish rule. But as in much of South America, there came a time when things began to boil over. At the beginning of the 19th century, the first independence movements began. And it was in 1818 that the cry for freedom came, with the help of figures such as Bernardo O'Higgins and José de San Martín. But the story did not end there. Even free from Spain, there were ups and downs, wars with neighbors, territorial disputes, and a lot of political tension. And of course, Anyone looking at the more recent past inevitably comes up against the shadow of the military dictatorship, which began in 1973 after the coup that overthrew the government of Salvador Allende. During the years of Augusto Pinochet's regime, the people faced one of the darkest periods in their history, with heavy censorship, political persecution, and thousands of dead and missing. It was not until 1990 that democracy was officially restored after a plebiscite that put an end to the dictatorship. On top of all this, the country still carries in its memory one of the greatest natural disasters ever recorded in human history. In 1960, the city of Valdivia was the epicenter of the strongest earthquake ever measured, with a magnitude of 9.5. The tremor was so intense that it displaced part of the coast, causing tsunamis that crossed the ocean and affected places as far away as Hawaii and Japan. To this day, this episode continues to be studied as one of the greatest seismic events in modern history. With so many significant events, what emerged was a history fraught with struggles, twists and turns, and a great deal of resilience. All of this helps to understand the strong mix of cultural pride and a certain wariness when it comes to politics. Number 3. Population. You know those famous sayings that size isn't everything? Well, in this country, that makes perfect sense. Despite being small, more than 19 million people live there, scattered across this crazy geographical corridor. In the capital, Santiago, alone, almost 6 million people live, which means that much of the country's life revolves around that central region. But although much of the population is concentrated in this more urban area, diversity is not limited to the climate and landscape. It is also evident in the mix of peoples. Of course, most are descendants of Spanish colonizers, but even today there are indigenous communities, mainly the Mapuche, who continue to fight to keep their culture, customs, and language alive. In addition to the Mapuche, there are also other smaller groups scattered throughout the territory, such as the Aymara in the north and the Rapa Nui on Easter Island. Each has its own customs, dialects, and traditions that weave together this unique cultural mosaic. The official language is Spanish, but the Spanish spoken there has its own unique flavor. The Chilean accent is known for being one of the most difficult to understand, even for other speakers of the language. They speak quickly, cut words short, create slang, and even have the famous habit of ending sentences with po. This is the famous sipo, which is nothing more than a very Chilean way of saying yes. And as if all this mixture weren't enough, there is also strong recent immigration, mainly from neighboring countries, but also from Haiti and Venezuela, who are seeking a new life in those parts. In other words, within that long country, there is a huge variety of stories, accents, and cultures. There are people from all over the world living side by side, each carrying a piece of this history. Number 4. Postcard. For those who like to be surprised on their travels, this is the right destination. It has a little bit of everything, and almost nothing in the traditional format that tourists expect to find. In the far north is the Atacama Desert, one of the driest and most impressive places on the planet. In some areas, it hasn't rained a drop in thousands of years. No wonder NASA has used the region as a laboratory to test equipment for Mars. The landscapes look like something from another world. There is the Valley of the Moon, with formations sculpted by the wind, salt lakes that act as perfect mirrors, geysers releasing steam, and the clearest skies on Earth for astronomical observation. Almost half of the planet's observatories are located there, taking advantage of this almost untouched window to the sky. Visitors have the chance to see the Milky Way with incredible clarity, something rare in other places. But the desert is not just home to surreal landscapes. Near the city of Arica, the world's oldest mummies were found. The Chinchorro culture, which lived in that region more than 7,000 years ago, practiced mummification techniques long before the Egyptians even thought of it. Some of these mummies can be seen today in local museums, revealing a past as arid as it is fascinating. In the same northern region, Ojos del Salado also stands out. There you will find the highest active volcano on the planet, at an altitude of almost 6,900 meters. For those who have no sense of scale, just imagine that it practically rivals Everest, in height only falling short because the Asian giant still has a few meters on it. Even so, Ojos del Salado is the largest volcano in the world and a major attraction for mountaineers and adventurers who take on the challenge of climbing it. In the central part, the scenery changes completely. There is Santiago with its mix of modern metropolis and local charm. It has museums, parks, restaurants, and that classic view of the Andes Mountains in the background, which makes any photo look professional. Not to mention that from there you can take tours to some of the most famous wineries on the planet, renowned for the quality of their wines and perfectly aligned grape valleys. Further south, the landscape becomes a real postcard. Crystal clear lakes, green forests, and active volcanoes dominate the scene. Pucón, for example, is a must-see for anyone who wants to see the Villarrica volcano spewing smoke high above. And it's no small feat. This territory is among the world leaders in the number of active volcanoes, with almost 100 in constant activity. As the journey continues, the natural spectacle only gets better. Patagonia offers gigantic glaciers, fjords cutting through the mountains, and Torres del Paine National Park, which has become a dream destination for every traveler who loves wild nature. And in the middle of the Pacific lies Easter Island. This is where the Moai are, those giant statues that no one has yet been able to explain how they were erected with such perfection. Some theories speak of tributes to ancestors, others bet on more hair-raising mysteries. What is certain is that the place continues to fascinate those who arrive there. But do you think it's just the landscapes that fascinate? Of course not. There's more, much more. Number 5. Culture and customs. Anyone who decides to spend some time there soon realizes that the way of life has some rules and quirks that are not so common in other places. And that's exactly where things get interesting. To begin with, there are rules for coexistence on the streets, which surprise many unsuspecting tourists. Walking shirtless in public is simply not allowed. And this applies to both the streets and urban beaches. Even in the heat, men with bare chests walking around town is a no-no. Drinking on the street is also not allowed. You can't open a beer in the square or on the sidewalk and think it's okay. Alcohol can only be consumed in authorized places, such as bars and restaurants. And even in these places, the rule is clear. If you sit down to drink, you have to order something to eat with it. Just drinking isn't usually well accepted. But while some places require you to wear too much, others require too little. A good example is the famous cafés con piernas, legs. In downtown Santiago, these establishments function as coffee shops, but with a very different twist. The waitresses serve coffee wearing tight dresses, high heels, and in some versions, even more daring outfits. Those who enter find a marble interior, mirrors, and a theatrical atmosphere that mixes sensuality with the country's conservative air. This trend began at the end of the military dictatorship in the 80s and spread until it became a cultural phenomenon. In addition to these urban curiosities, there is also the side of folkloric traditions that remain strong in various regions. Like the La Tirana festival in the north, which for days transforms the city into a huge stage for dancing, music, masks, and celebrations with roots in ancient Andean rituals. Ultimately, what you see is a culture that balances tradition and modernity with its own unique way of mixing what can be mixed, what can't be mixed, and what happens between the lines. Number 6. Gastronomy. If there is one thing that gives you a good understanding of the way of life there, it is the food. Visitors soon discover that meals are not complicated, but full of special touches that give everything that local flavor. Street food is practically a chapter unto itself. Walking through the cities, you'll find stalls selling completos, which are basically supercharged hot dogs. The bread is loaded with sausage, mayonnaise, tomato, and the obligatory touch, palta. And palta, for those who aren't familiar, is nothing more than the famous avocado. Only there, it's taken to another level. Avocado is served for breakfast, in sandwiches, salads, sushi, and even fast food burgers. There, avocado is treated as a savory side dish, with a generous sprinkling of salt on practically everything. It's no exaggeration to say that the obsession with avocado has become almost a trademark. In addition to the complete meals, there are also empanadas, which are a classic, stuffed with meat, chicken, or seafood, as well as sopaipillas, which are like small fried doughs served with sauces. It's the kind of simple, tasty food that satisfies your hunger without any frills. Now, speaking of drinks, tap water is technically drinkable. However, those who are not used to it may find the taste strange. Due to the high concentration of minerals, many people notice a slightly salty, metallic aftertaste. For this reason, most tourists end up buying bottled water, just to avoid the risk of turning their trip into an unnecessary gastrointestinal experience. And of course, wine also has a strong presence on the table. With so many fertile valleys and a long tradition of wine production, the country has become a world reference for quality wines. From Cabernet to Carmenère, there is always a good bottle at hand. Ultimately, the cuisine there reflects the local spirit, simple, with some customs that are unexpected, and full of details that visitors only really understand when they taste them. Number 7. Curiosities. And to finish, let's move on to some interesting facts, because it's not enough to have coffee served in lingerie, a volcano that almost rivals Everest, an earthquake that shook half the planet, and a NASA observatory in the desert. There's more, and it's the kind of information that makes us think that this country was really designed to make history. Remember the clear skies of Atacama? Well, it's not just NASA that enjoys this privileged view. There is an official department dedicated to investigating reports of unidentified flying objects. It is the Committee for the Study of Anomalous Aerial Phenomena of Chile, better known as CEFAA. While in much of the world this subject remains a conspiracy theory, there it is treated seriously, with official investigations and everything. Heading down to the coast, there is another attraction that catches the eye. The world's largest swimming pool was once located there. In Algarrobo, a coastal town just over 100 kilometers from Santiago, the San Alfonso del Mar was built, a high-end residential and tourist resort famous for its gigantic swimming pool. It is over a kilometer long and contains 250 million liters of salt water, pumped directly from the ocean. It is so spacious that you can practice water sports inside as if it were a private mini-bay. Seen from above, it looks like a blue strip carved out of the seashore. And to top it off, there's even room for a curious flag. Many people confuse the local flag with that of Texas in the United States. Both have a white star, blue background, and red and white stripes. But here's the detail. The Chilean flag came first. It was adopted in 1817, shortly after independence. The Texas flag only appeared much later, in 1839. In other words, it's easy to see who inspired whom in this story. Joking aside, in the end, we can safely say that this territory may be narrow on the map, but it's rich in history, contrast, oddities, and above all, good stories to tell. Isn't that right? Now I want to hear from you. Which of these curiosities surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments. And of course, if you liked the video, leave a like, share it with anyone who would enjoy hearing these stories. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take this opportunity to join our team. There's a lot more of this Bello Mundo coming your way.